Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, are there any other veterans here in the crowd today? Well, I was hoping there might be. Before I start, I'd like to make a couple of comments about myself so you know who I am. I was born and grew up in a small town in New York State on a farm, Williamson, New York. It's about 30 miles east of Rochester and about 60 miles west of Syracuse. It's a farming community. And my father came here from Holland, bought the farm, paid too much for it, and we lost it in the Depression. Had to start all over again. So without a doubt, I was not the wealthiest person in my graduating class. I graduated in 1942, and the class was 42 people. And of course, the war had just gotten started, so most of us knew that we would be considered. Fortunately for a lot of them, I could have been the same, I guess. Farmers were pretty much exempt from the war because they had to grow the food for the country. But I thought I had all the answers and couldn't wait to go. So I went into the Army, and at the time, thought it was the greatest thing in the world. I took my basic training down in Fort McClellan, Alabama. And in those days, basic training was 13 weeks. And I can assure you they weren't 13 40-hour weeks. And when you got through, you were in pretty good condition. Partway through the training, they'd given us a bunch of tests. Obviously, the Army's testing wasn't very good because they called me in and they said, you did very well, you have a very high IQ, we're going to send you to school up in New York, Manhattan College, under a program called ASTP, to teach you to be an engineering officer. And I didn't want to do it. I was smart, thought I could want to go fight. So they sent me up there and I goofed off, and in a short order they said, I guess you do want to fight, so they sent me down to Tennessee on maneuvers for the 8th Infantry. And I was back in the infantry. And at the time was very happy to do so. And in short order we were on a boat to Northern Ireland. I were to finish up our final tune-up before going into Europe. Before I go any further, I'd like to make a couple of comments about many times I get stopped by people and say that thank you for your service and you guys fought the last of the good wars and people today wouldn't do what you did. Well, first of all, there's no such thing as a good war. I don't care if it's, and the World War II was different in many respects. Number one, it's the only time in our history we were attacked by a foreign power, the Japanese, on December 7, 1941. And within a couple of days, Hitler declared war on the United States. So we had two choices, fight or surrender. And I don't believe our generation did anything different than any other generation would have done. You fight. You don't want to speak German, or you otherwise learn to speak German or Japanese. So we went off to fight. You have to remember, a lot of us were drafted. So would we have done the same if not? I don't know. I can't guarantee that. But so often, a guy wrote a book here a few years ago called The Greatest Generation. And I take exception to our being the greatest generation. I think every generation I've seen in my lifetime has been great, including the present one. I had the good fortune or stupidity, or whatever you want to call it, to at the ripe old age of 85, to go back to school. I had been very fortunate. Coming out of World War II, I started driving a truck, and they Didn't want to be gone, so I went on the docks in North Tonawanda, New York, loading trucks. And ultimately became president and CEO of a multi-million-dollar transportation company without benefit of college. And people say it could be done in those days, but when I'd go to industry meetings, I generally was the only guy there without a degree. And my late wife was a school teacher, and she'd retired, and she kept kidding me about going back to school. So at the ripe old age of 85, and a couple of weeks later I was going to be 86, I went over to Lakeland Community College and graduated at 88. And I got to tell you, the kids were great. I think these kids are a lot greater than we give them credit for. And I had a ball. But anyway, getting back to basic training in Fort McClellan, Alabama. It's tough. And we got us on a boat then, on a ship to go to Europe. They were going to take us to, we didn't know it at the time, but take us to Northern Ireland to prepare us for our next phase of our journey. And we spent 3-4 months there. It took us about 16 days, as I recollect, to cross a route that normally would take 4 to 5 days at the most, because we were in a convoy and they were sinking a lot of the ships, and so they had to take us way up in the North Atlantic. It was cold, water go over the deck. The ship that we went over on would maybe in peacetime carry 300 people, and we had over 1,500 on there. So you were in hammocks, triple decked and everything else. And we finally arrived in Northern Ireland. I think it was November of 1943 to prepare for Europe. And in Northern Ireland, at that time of the year, the days are relatively long or short, and nights are relatively long. And they don't really get much snow, but it was awful damp. And we were there till the following June. And our training there consisted of things like 50-mile hikes with a full pack and a rifle. Full pack and a rifle is pretty good weight. And we did those. So they got us in pretty good shape. Sometime during the training period, General Eisenhower came out with a directive that every regiment would send 2 men to the British Army, and the British would send 2 to take your place for 2 weeks to create better communication and better relations between the American and the British. And myself and a guy by the name of Sergeant Rule Cox, I can give his name because he died. He was from North Carolina. He was in our regiment, a different company. I was in the 2nd Battalion. He was in the 3rd Battalion. We were the 2 that were sent over to the British Army for 2 weeks. And we were stationed on Lord Beaverbrook's estate, which is where we did our training, which is outside of Enniskillen, Northern Ireland. And where I was sent then was outside of Belfast to be with the British. And of course, in Great Britain during the war, everything had to be imported. So their food was not the greatest. And of course, they were a little envious of us because with our $50 a month pay, less our insurance, which brought it down to about $42, $43, we were better paid than they were. And of course, once we got overseas, they give us a 50% increase, so we got $75. But then I was promoted to PFC, I got another $4. So we spent the 2 weeks with the British Army, and it was different. I must confess, you were a British soldier. You slept in with their bunks like they did, ate what they ate, and trained what they did. I mentioned that only because we were, I was the youngest guy in the outfit. And the regiment at that time was primarily Southerners. Prior to the war, they had been National Guard from Georgia, and of course the Carolinas and that. So, and Rule Cox was from North Carolina. At the completion, well, during our training, we had a couple of dry runs where we packed everything up to go to the ships to go to Europe for the invasion. And then when we'd get to Belfast and get all ready to go down, you up the ramp, you go down the ramp on the other side, it was a dry run to make sure that you knew what you were doing, and go back out to the camp and unpack again. We did that a couple of times to get ready. We later went into France. I did not go in on D-Day, but I went in shortly thereafter. And I can assure you, I was in what they call the combat infantry. I'm front lines all the time. Your job is to destroy the enemy. His job is to destroy you. You live basically like an animal, because when you stop fighting, you dig a foxhole. You have a little shovel in the back of your pack. You dig a hole so you can get below the level of the ground. The idea is to get below the level of the ground is because if they throw grenades at your artillery, well, the shells are flying, you got a better chance of not getting hurt too seriously. Or if you were above ground, you get hurt real bad. But when you dig a foxhole, of course, when you're fighting, you don't dig a foxhole, you keep moving. And the American Army's object was to be on the offense all the time. So we were in a go a lot. Incidentally, when we got off the boats, the landing barges to go into the beach, we had to go down these long rope ladders. And when we got off got into the landing barges, they took us in as far as they could. They still hadn't built all the piers and that yet. They dropped us off and the water was up to here on us. So you carried your rifle when you went in. You got dried when the sun dried you. From there, the first time I got wounded was at St. Lo, which is just, I'm guessing it must be 30, 35 miles from the beach. By that time, we'd suffered quite a few casualties, and I'd been promoted to sergeant. An offbeat on that, I don't have a lot of respect for bullies, because we had a sergeant that was a bully. And to hear him tell it over in Northern Ireland, in fact, I thought he was going to win the war alone. And his comment was always that the first guy even turns like he might be going to come back from the front line, I'll shoot him myself. And we weren't in France very long when he couldn't handle it, and he shot himself in the foot. So I became the sergeant. So I don't have a lot of respect for those kind of people, because most of the time they don't do what they say they're going to do anyway. Anyway, we got to St. Lo, and by that time, and just before St. Lo, I'd been wounded. Fortunately, it wasn't too serious. I hit with a hand grenade, but fortunately, we got the right leg and the right shoulder and so forth. They take you back to the hospital and take it out, send you back. I mean, after all, they need you. Casualties are high. You can't visualize the fact that the front lines, the line companies, casualties probably run 200-300%. Our division, each division suffered a little over 100% casualties. There's 15,000 men in the division. We had over 15,000 casualties. When I say casualties, that could be wounded, killed, captured. Some people said to me when I was one of the schools, they said, well, you're still here. Yeah, I was wounded twice, so I'm 2 casualties. But it's frontline casualty, that's where your casualties are. Most people don't realize in World War II, there was over 16 million served, and probably only about 15 to 20% actually saw frontline combat. So the casualties were very high up there. Anyway, we got to St. Lo, and then we had a little break in the fighting. We're still in shelling range, but it was kind of a holding thing. That was when they getting ready for General Patton to come in with the Third Army to make the breakthrough. So you still had to be very careful, but at least you could move around a little bit. And we got a chance to get a hot meal, change of clothes, and so forth. When you're in the front lines of the infantry in World War II, and by the way, things changed from one war to the next. The people in World War I had it a lot more difficult than we did as far as food, medical care, and so forth. Ours was so much superior, and it got better as each war goes on because times change. We didn't have helicopters in World War II to use for the front lines. Now they pick them up and get them out of there in a hurry. With us, sometimes we had to wait to get an ambulance to get you back to the hospitals. So things changed a lot. Well, anyway, when you're in the front lines, most of the time you're on K rations. K rations, you have to carry 3 or 4 meals, 3 meals a day. Each meal is the size of a Cracker Jack box. The breakfast meal, and they're wrapped in just like a Cracker Jack box, like that's a wax cover to keep the weather out. The breakfast one would be a little can of eggs and some instant coffee, which is the first time I'd ever seen it, and hard biscuits. And the lunch one was pork or cheese, I forgot, and hard biscuits and a lemon drink. And then the other one, and the third meal would be pork or the cheese, hard biscuits, and bouillon. If you were lucky enough that you could get, so they couldn't see a fire, you could heat up a little water in your canteen cup to make the coffee more tasteful, or the bouillon. Most of the time you couldn't, so you just make them drink the cold coffee. You could carry 2 or 3 days of rations with you, and you're back, no problem. And you also carried a couple of what they call D rations. A D ration was a chocolate bar, about the size of a Hershey bar, only about that thick. You could hit with a hammer, it wouldn't split. Very, very hard, but there was a lot of vitamins in it, would keep you going. So, anyway, before we got to St. Lo, we were in what they call the hedgerows. And in the hedgerows were fields, and the fields were not real large, 3, 4 acres, I suppose you could say, maybe 5, I don't know. But they'd be surrounded by these hedgerows that had been there for probably centuries. And they'd grown so thick with the roots and the shrubs and the bushes and the trees, you couldn't see through them. Tanks couldn't get through them. They finally developed forks to put on the tanks so that they could start to get through. But there's really one entrance, in and out. Well, anytime you tried to go in the entrance, the Germans were inside. They had machine guns set up. So we suffered an awful lot of casualties during those battles through the hedgerows. I don't want to get into all the gory details because combat is not a pleasant thing. And aside from that, before I go into further, several years ago, they made a movie called Saving Private Ryan. And about during that time it had been made, I had to go to my hometown for something. And my son, second oldest son, who was an entertainer, happened to be in town. He says, "Dad, I'd like to go along." "Come along, you drive." So we're driving along, and he said, "Hey," he says, I went to see Saving Private Ryan. Did you see it?" I said, yeah. "Is it really that bad?" He says, "No, it's worse." He's like, "My God, I can't believe it." It is. There's death all the time. There's maimed all the time. The hospitals are nothing more than a big tent. And they're out of artillery range, but that's about it. They take you back in a Jeep or ambulance, depending how serious you are. Get you back there as quick as they can, when they can, because some days you're under fire, they can't get to you. They take you back there, and they have a smaller tent to the side, and that's the operating room. They take you in there. If it's like I had shrapnel, they don't put me all the way out. Give me locals, because they got so many. There's maybe a dozen, 15 doctors in there all the time. And you cannot believe what you see. It's they wheel you in there, take the stuff out, take you over to the hospital tent. The hospital tent is nothing more than cots like you go camping with, and they're lined up side by side all over the place. And in those days, it was their first time they were using penicillin. So it wasn't once a day. You got it it was either every 2 or every 4 hours. The nurse came by and whack you with a shot of penicillin. So it's a sad thing. In fact, the second time I got wounded up in northern France, I was starting to feel sorry for myself that day. Here I got hit this time with artillery. And I thought, "Oh my God, what's happening now?" They wheel me in that operating room, 15, 20 doctors in there. I look around, there's guys with no arms, no legs, half the face gone. I didn't feel sorry for myself no more. In fact, I couldn't wait to get out of there. It's a brutal scene of war. For those that don't know it, World War II, there was over 425,000 killed, and probably 700,000 or 800,000 wounded. So pretty serious business. Anyway, at St. Lo, we got replacements to fill up the. You're getting replacements all the time. You say, how do you get casualties? That bring new people in. So I was getting replacements, and that morning we were to jump off at 4 or 5 o'clock. We had to get a breakthrough in the line so that Patton could go through with the tanks. And when we jumped off, I had 35 men, and by 9 o'clock, I had 12. Either been wounded or killed. But we got through, and that's when Patton made his fast breakthrough. And it was unbelievable how fast he started to move. Then he went down south for a ways, then they turned east and shot their way to Paris and across France. Granted, it took days, or weeks, but it was a lot faster than they'd ever expected. We were sidetracked for a while to go over to Dinard and try to get ports over there. Then we were sent down to Brest for a while, and then we were sent east too. But incidentally, as I go along, if anybody has a question or a comment you want to make, stick your hand up. Yes, ma'am.
Between the shovel, the rifle, everything in there, how much did this backpack weigh? I mean, you know.
Well, in combat, your backpack doesn't weigh a lot because you only carry a blanket, maybe a raincoat, because you want to be flexible. The rifle itself, the Grand M1, was probably the greatest weapon they ever developed for an infantryman. I don't know what it weighs, 40, 50 pounds, I don't know. You carry a lot of ammunition. But you're in good shape. That's why they want young people. It's, you're in top physical shape when you get to it. And I can assure you, the human body will take more than you can ever believe. And I'll tell you this, when you think you can't take another step, they start shooting at you, take another 5 miles. I guarantee you, when your life's on the line, you'll be surprised how much longer you can go. You go without sleep, you go without anything, you go without eating. And it's amazing that how long you can go. You can't believe it. When people say you can't, in the wintertime, it's cold. I mean, you can't believe how cold you get, but you get up and go. But I had before we went into France, General Patton spoke to us up in Northern Ireland one time. And he said, when we go into France on the invasion, 3 out of 4 of you probably won't come back. You'll either be wounded or you'll be killed. That was a comment they made to the front line. He's talking about frontline troops. They have you so charged up. I felt sorry for the other 3 guys. That's how charged up you get. You say you can't. You got to remember, in World War II, there was no television. Most radio, if you lived very far from a big city, wasn't very good. There was no FM, there was AM. So you didn't see all this stuff. When I got overseas, I couldn't wait to get over to fight. And after I got there, I thought, what the hell was I thinking about? But it's too late. You can't. And in the infantry, in the front lines, there's no such thing as a tour of duty unless you get seriously wounded, bring you back to the States. You're there till the war is over, till you're dead. It's not like nowadays they have it's on the tour of duty there for 12 months or whatever it is. In those days that wasn't. I was there 21 months. So, but the newspapers and the movies, everything glorified what it was to stand up for your country. And your thoughts were different. Plus the fact that you went to battle, they got you charged up. And secondly, I spoke at school, and sometimes the kids say, well, how could you, you're afraid. Sure you're afraid. Anybody tells you you're not afraid, it'd be crazy. But why do you go? You don't want to embarrass yourself to your buddies. There's that comradeship. You get so close to one another. You don't want to, would you want to run when all the rest of them are there fighting? You just don't do it. And you're trained for it. But it's the backpack itself is not that heavy. You throw it a couple of days of K rations. Don't forget you're young, you're in shape. That's nothing. That weight is nothing. And you can go for hours. You'd be surprised how long you can go. Well, anyway, we got through there, and then we headed east. Probably the toughest battle for us was Hurtgen Forest. Hurtgen Forest, by the way, before I start talking about Hurtgen Forest, I'm going to pass this book around, and in the back, not in the back, total back, near the back, there's a bunch of pictures, and they show some of the devastation, and they also show some pictures, a couple of pictures of the concentration camp. We relieved 2 concentration camps, or us and other divisions, but we relieved up near Schwerin, Germany, and there's a couple of pictures of those in there too. We got up near Belgium, or Germany, and there was a battle of Hurtgen Forest, which is the bloodiest battle of World War II in Europe. Before the battle was over, there was over 33,000 casualties. Our regiment received a unit citation for it because we finally got through, but it was several weeks. It was a battle that probably never should have been fought. Hurtgen Forest was a heavily dense forest, and even when you dug a foxhole, it was no good because the shells hit the top of the trees, and I don't care where you were going to get hit. So the casualties was enormous, and it was some of the worst weather they'd ever had in Europe. It was cold, snow, mud, everything was cold. You couldn't get warm. They couldn't get there to bring you a hot meal. So sometimes you didn't eat for a couple of days. And historians have generally concluded, even Army historians have concluded, that the battle probably shouldn't have been fought. It was a waste of manpower. It took a lot of time to do it. Should have gone around it. We finally got through the town of Hurtgen, and there was not a building standing, not one. And the guy that wrote that book I served with we went into the basements to get out of the weather a little bit. He fell down the staircase. He was a company commander by that time. Not ours, but the G company, another company. And hurt his back. He was sent back to the States, never served again. But there wasn't a building standing. When we got into Germany, there might be a picture in there. If not, it's in another book I have. There's a picture showing welcome to Cologne, Germany, courtesy of the 8th Division. Cologne was a city about the size of Cleveland. The only thing standing was the twin cathedrals in the center of the city. And can you imagine a city that size? There's nothing. It's flattened. American people for the most part, don't realize the devastation that war brings. It's so often some people can't wait to go to war, but they don't realize what it is. People in Europe are not as anxious because they've seen this time and again. You take big cities like that, there'd be nothing left. Small towns flattened. Even in France, when we first got into France, the villages, there was nothing. Everything had been destroyed because we'd bombed it, artillery, and then of course we'd gone in there. So there's a huge amount of damage. Hurtgen Forest when you go to the World War II Memorial in Washington, there's a section there marked Hurtgen Forest. It was without a doubt the bloodiest battle of the war, and never should have been fought. After Hurtgen Forest, of course, then we continued on. And once we crossed the Rhine, casualties dropped dramatically because the Germans were moving fairly fast. They weren't giving up. Well, they were giving up more, and they weren't fighting as much. So then that became not so bad. We wound up at Schwerin, Germany, which is up near the Baltic Sea. We'd met the Russians a couple of days before, and then there was 2 concentration camps at Treblinka. One was for men, one was for boys, or women and men, or women and children. Concentration camps, if someone ever tells you, are not a reality. You don't ever want to see one. The sights, the smells, it's terrible. You saw grown men that might have weighed 60 pounds. There was our division, or our regiment. We were told not to feed them anything. They asked for something, you gave it to them. You shouldn't have. Probably killed some of them. And one of the companies of our regiment smuggled a little boy out of there. He was a little Italian kid. when they got him out of there, they made a little uniform for him with our outfit. And then the war ended shortly thereafter. And we were notified that our division had been selected to go get the area secured. We'd be sent to the States for furloughs, 33 days, and then they would have experienced combat troops to go to, we were to invade Japan. Obviously, we weren't the most contented about that, I can assure you. This Company L, we got the area secured, and it took us back to Le Havre to get us on a boat to the United States, to go to Boston first. And I did not know it. You know, we got to Boston. Word spread, don't get off the boat, don't get off the boat, don't get off the boat. Geez, I'm glad to be home, no. They'd smuggled this little boy that they'd got out of this concentration camp, they'd smuggled him on the boat. He didn't weigh anything. They smuggled him aboard on a duffel bag. And of course, when they got on the boat, the sailors didn't care, so they took him out and fed him. Well, we got to Boston, they weren't going to let him off the boat. Well, it was in the newspapers. We stayed on for a few hours till they decided they wanted us to get home so we could get over the Pacific. While nearly 4,000 soldiers roared with glee yesterday because they were back in their native land, a small, drooping figure in khaki walked down the dock in tears, an immigration inspector beside him, because they said he was an Italian boy who'd been smuggled aboard the transport. 9-year-old, blue-eyed and blonde, the tail Pavlato, an orphan, still wore the trim little uniform of the 8th Division insignia that his comrades of Company L, 121st Infantry, had provided after they released him from a camp at Schwerin, Germany. They said he had been in prison after killing a Nazi officer who had abused him. And because of his small size, they added it had been easy to bring him aboard the Navy transport General Bliss in a barracks bag. Separated from his other small companions, starting for redeployment for furloughs home, they sat through the long hours into immigration offices while they reported what to do and so forth. They finally allowed him to stay because we had made such an issue out of it. And this little boy came back here. I missed him. He came back here a few years ago, and I guess he's dead now, but came back to visit the people to thank him very much for what they'd done for him. He's 9 years old. This is the kind of thing you do. When you're in the front lines, comes Christmas, it's just another day to fight. And if anyone was to send you something, they'd have to be something you could eat. What else would you do with it? They don't send you sweaters and ties or something. What would you do with it? And my mother had sent me a little box of cookies. There was some pieces of candy in it. And she stuffed the high school newspaper in this box. So we'd captured this bunker, been captured, shot the Germans, and I took it over. A bunker was nothing more than a huge foxhole where 4 or 5 you could get in together, and it was something like a piece of metal or something over the top of it. See, it wouldn't have any weather. There wasn't any lights or no heat or anything. But at least you could be out of the weather a little bit. So we got into it, and I called back on the radio and said, hey guys, in the rear, we're out of rations. And when you send the rations up, they had runners that brought them up to you. Bring up there's 3 or 4 of us, I forgot what's in here, in this bunker. And also bring our mail and give them the 4 names. And the kid popped in there with the stuff. I said, wait a minute, buddy. I'd opened it up, there was a school paper. I said, hang on a minute, buddy. I just want to scribble a few lines to my high school principal. So I sat down and scribbled a few lines to my high school principal and said, here's the address. When you get back there, mail this for me. I completely forgot about it. And on my 50th high school reunion, we'd held it at a golf course in Sodas Point, New York, which is 6 or 7 miles from my hometown. And at the 50th course, a lot of them came. I said, Bob, you got to be our Toastmaster. You've been through so much. And by that time, I was a corporate officer. So, all right. And our high school principal had flown up from North Atlanta to join us. He later became president of the college, but he wanted to join us. So when I introduced him, he got up, he says, I'm not going to give a speech, I'm going to read a letter. It was a letter I'd written. Christmas Eve, somewhere in Germany. Hello, Mr. Northrop. Tonight I received a Christmas package from my mother, and included was a copy of the high school paper. So I decided to write you a few lines. I thought the paper was very good. Brought back many happy memories of my high school days. I oftentimes wish that I were back there again and had it to do all over again. Since coming in the Army, I have found many times that I passed up some very good opportunities while in high school. Since leaving the States a little over a year ago, I have visited several European countries that only a couple of years back were merely spots on a map. In some cases, I've seen some very beautiful sights, and in other cases, they were sites of utter destruction caused by the ruthlessness of war. Oftentimes when I see the latter of these two, I wonder if man is as civilized as we are supposed to be, or if we aren't still barbarians. I often wonder why, when these controversial subjects arise, that they couldn't just as well be settled in a civilized way at a peace table or something similar to that. Maybe the future will bear this out. Well, Mr. Northrop, everything is fine here, and I hope that you are well also. Things are fairly quiet up here tonight, and it sure seems good. Right now, there are 5 of us here in the German foxhole. It is one they sort of evacuated a short time ago, so we moved in to enjoy its comforts. Jerry is starting to throw a few shells at us now, so I guess I better sign off. That was me. That was a letter I wrote when I was 19 years old. I was still only 19 years old. It's when I tell you how bad it is, I don't regret a minute of it I did. I caused it by myself. And secondly, it had to be done. So I'm never sorry for my service. I'm proud of my service to my country, I'm proud of my country. I spoke to a high school kid, and one kid says, well, how old were you? I said, well, I was gone for almost 3 years. I spent 21 months in Europe. I was wounded twice and received a few awards. Had 270 days of frontline combat. When I arrived at my hometown, or Rochester, New York, at the railroad station, my parents to pick me up for going furlough. I've been gone all of this. I'm still 6 months away from being 21 years old, only 20 years old yet. I couldn't legally buy a drink or vote. Now, I'm not going to tell you I didn't buy a drink, but I couldn't do it legally. Anyway, that's a little bit about my service. I didn't go into a lot of detail because it's not always a pleasant subject. Yes, ma'am.
When you got to the concentration camp, what did you do? What was your goal, or what were you supposed to do there?
I would like to think in most of my life, I've been in fairly good control of my emotions. I would have to say I get, like everybody, occasionally get mad at something, but generally it's under control. When I first got there and saw it, I actually threw my rifle down to look for a German to kill with my bare hands. But they'd all run off because they were scared they were going to get shot. They don't run. But I actually looked for one to kill with my bare hands. I didn't want to shoot him. I wanted him to suffer. That's what can happen when you see this. The sight, the smells, the stacks of shoes and clothing. You just can't visualize it. It's probably the most deploring sight, maybe once or twice a year. I have a tough time sleeping because I think about it. But that's all. The war itself, well, you fight. But the concentration camps were hard to swallow. It's the one thing it always was. But I actually did. It was the one thing I probably was out of control. Fortunately, I didn't get one. Or maybe they would have court-martialed me for killing a man, but I wouldn't have cared at the time. But it's a sad sight to see. And these were people, when you see people being killed in the war, we're soldiers, we're fighting one another. My job is to kill him and his is to kill me. But these were people who were non-combatants. many cases, they were just people because they were Jewish or because they were Russian or because they were some other nationality or some other color or something. They didn't do anything. If I get shot, I'm shooting at the other guy. That's the luck of the draw. But these were people and the kids. There was lots of kids. They didn't do anything to anybody. That was hard to swallow. Probably the worst sight that you could see. I think most people I've ever saw that went through them said the same thing. I mean, you don't like to see your buddy shot, and you see it every day. You don't like to see them. Sometimes you can't get to them. It's tough at times, but you handle it. But not when you see something like that. That is very difficult to contemplate. The war itself, I mean, that's part of war. It's like a guy. If you're a boxer, you go in the ring, you're going to get hit. If you're not prepared to get hit, you don't get in the ring. I mean, that's life. There's a lot of things in life we may not like. If you're a heavy smoker, you wind up with lung cancer. I mean, it's nice to feel sad, but by the same token, you had something to do with it. But for people who do everything right to have something happen, that's a little different. A lot of these were kids and women and old people. A lot of people think they were just Jewish. No, there was a lot of stuff. High percentage of them were Jewish, but there were so many others. Like this little 9-year-old Italian boy. He was an Italian, Italy supporter, was on the same side. But of course they abused everybody, so the kids shot the officer. Luckily they didn't shoot him, but they stuck him in the camp, which is just about as worse probably. But so often when we talk about World War II, everybody says how united everybody was. I think that they're forgetting that in 1940, the president asked for a lot of draft young men because our military at that time couldn't have beat Greenland. The truth was, we couldn't have beat Greenland. It was bad because we hadn't done anything in 30 years. So they passed a draft law. Before the year was up, for 1 year. That's all I could be drafted for 1 year. Before the year was up, they realized that it was 1941, things were getting hot. There was any intelligent person by mid-1941 knew we were going to be in war. We didn't know when, but we knew it was coming. So the president asked him to extend it beyond a year. It passed Congress by 1 vote. People forget that. The country was that divided. And some of those who had been drafted for the 12 months said they were going to go home anyway. They weren't going to stay. So sometimes we forget that. The country wasn't totally divided. We had a lot of leaders. Lindbergh, Joe Kennedy, John Kennedy's father, were against us. Well, when Japan hit us and Germany declared war, everybody jumps up and we're all on the same side now. But we didn't start that way. A lot of people, I have people say to me, the younger generation is good. I said, wait a minute. I was around in the 30s and they thought we were a bunch of nuts. I mean, I can remember Hitler and those guys thought the American youth would be easy to beat. I think my father thought, these kids aren't as good. Well, every generation thinks that, but it's not true. Each generation is, one guy asked me, how much better? I said, yeah. I started school in 1930. I went to kindergarten at a 1-room schoolhouse. No electricity, no indoor plumbing. Every row was a separate grade. After about the 2nd grade, finally they built a central school and we all closed these little 1-rooms. And instantly it wasn't 5 miles uphill both ways. It was about a mile, mile and a quarter, maybe a mile and a half. But they had several of them in the town. So they got opened a central school and we got bused there. Well, I can assure you, I wasn't always one of the best kids there. And from that, we did a lot of things. People today got the idea that everything was great. It wasn't. And the kids today are so much. If in 1932, I'd have been Rip Van Winkle and went into hiding for 5 years and came out, I wouldn't have missed a thing. The cars even wouldn't have changed. Everything stayed the same. You missed 2 years today, you think, what the hell happened? Well, seriously. the generation today, it moves so fast, but these kids keep up with it. I went to an awards thing I had to go to an awards thing at Strongsville for veterans, BFW. We honored the teacher of the year and the student of the year and so forth. As I was walking up to the front to get a drink, some leading citizen stopped and said, "Hey, Bob, you were World War II." "Thank you." I said, "Yeah. The kids today wouldn't do what you did." I said, "I disagree with you." "You do?" I said, yeah. I disagree strongly. "Why?" I said, "World War II, a high percentage of us were drafted. Do you realize a couple years ago, we invaded Iraq? And on the Sunday morning TV shows, it said we'd be there for years. They'd be bringing the kids home in the bags by the boatload. Those kids went in there and won that war in 5 days. Of course, the politicians weren't ready for it yet. They thought it was going to drag on. They won it in 5 days, and everyone was a volunteer. You tell me these kids want to do it?" He said, "I hadn't thought about that." Everyone was volunteer. You had a question?
Have you gone back to some of the same places you were at later in life?
Yes, I was going to talk about that for a minute. I've been back several times to the cemeteries to visit. I've been to the cemetery at Omaha Beach, and I've been to the cemetery at Maastricht in Holland, and I've been to the cemetery at up in Luxembourg and different places to find fellows that I served with. And I discovered that if you go to Holland or Belgium, these places, the national cemeteries there, every grave is adopted by a business, a school, or a person. And on that person's birthday, a day he died, and Veterans Day, there's flowers. That family does that. They've been since World War II. And they have a waiting list of people to take their places. 3 years ago, the French, 3 years ago, maybe about this time, it was earlier, it was in January. I was sitting at home, the phone rang, and the lady said, "Mr. Zonneville, yeah, I'm from the French ambassador's office in Chicago." I said, "What the hell do you want with me?" She says, "We saw a lot of stuff on the internet about you. We think you might be entitled to an award from our country. Would you send us a copy of your awards and your discharge?" And so, yeah, I sent it. I forgot about it. And that fall, November, I got a letter from them stating they had elected to give me the Legion of Honor, the highest award the French government gives. And could I be at the Veterans Home in Sandusky on December 6th or something? My wife and I, and the ambassador was there, and it was quite a ceremony. And apparently they put that on their internet over there. And I got letters from people in Belgium and Holland. And every one, when you open it up, I said, well, I looked at the mail by Belgium, I don't know anybody there. Opened it up, the letter came out and a $2 bill fell out. And they had adopted graves, they wanted to know something about me. Would I send it back? And the enclosure was $2 to pay for the postage. You tell me these people don't appreciate it. I think you saw a couple of those letters the guys wrote. They do appreciate it. If you go to those cemeteries, it's sad to see row after row of white crosses. Everyone's the same, except if they're Jewish, they have the Star of David on them. But all the rest are the same. Just has the person's name and so forth. And there's flowers, there's a chapel at every one, and there's a blade of grass out of place. They're a thing of beauty. They're as nice as Arlington. You can't believe it. So they are appreciative. And I've been back, as I say, several times. I went to Normandy down there and had my late wife with me. And we were treated right. They went to a bar there, and they could give you anything you wanted. It was amazing. People are so appreciative. The boys that fought in Korea, about a year ago, they have a lady president. She sent, I don't know how many thousands of books on Korea as it was today and as it was, pictures of how the country is today and how it was when they were there. You should see these books, they're beautiful. We gave them out. I think I gave about 300-400 of them to the guys that served in Korea. And there was no charge, and with a letter in the front of the book from her showing their appreciation for her, saving her country. But so often we look at the bad. I don't have time for that. I've been lucky. I told you when I started. Did I have setbacks? Yes. I don't dwell on setbacks. I tell the students that when I talk to them over at the school. As Tom knows, I don't want to talk about setbacks because then you'll think about setbacks. Dwell on the positive. Always dwell on the positive. Anybody else had a question out there? It ain't all I can answer for you. I'd gladly do it. I hope I didn't jump around too much.
Yeah,
It's
you went to Ireland or JS. You were attached to JSBD. What was that group called? You used an acronym. JSPD.
Oh, that was in the Manhattan College where I went to school for a while for the government. ASTP.
The ASTP.
Army Specialized Training Program.
Okay.
And then they later, about 1944, 45, they abolished it and sent all of them overseas. But they kept that on for a while. I was only there a short time because I didn't want to do it. I was, like most of us, I think, in life, thought we wanted something, and when we got it, we were sorry. Well, I thought I wanted to go fight, and I got there. And once you get there, you can't say, well, I changed my mind. And you're there till something serious happens. But yes, I got there, and I thought, what the hell was I, pardon my language, what the hell was I thinking about? But I did it. I'm not, probably could have stayed in the States and done all this for a while, but. Well,
You graduated from Lakeland in '88, and when you were
at 88, yeah.
what did you major in?
Business. Had to do something I knew something about, otherwise I wouldn't have made it. The kids were great. I probably wouldn't have graduated if it hadn't been for the kids. But you're away from school 70 years. You think you know something, you don't. It's changed so much. A computer, there wasn't even a word computer when I started school. Not even a word. When I retired as president and CEO of the company, when I went in there, when I first got there, they put a brand new computer system in the office, my office. When I retired, they had a big party for me at this country club, and my secretary got up and said, we put a brand new computer, and then when he came, and when he left, it's still brand new. He never touched it. Well, I didn't know what to do with it. I got great-grandkids, they're 7, 8 years old, they showed me how to do it. And you tell me, these kids, I have so much. And Lakeland does a marvelous job, and it's an affordable school. The kids can get a couple of years of college in before they have to go on. They can still stay home. Doesn't cost them anything. It's one of the greatest programs around, and the teachers over there are marvelous. It's an institution. There's a couple of representatives that are here today, and they might go back and tell the president I said it, but it's a place you can go in and talk to the president. I don't know. It's just a good school, and I'm very proud of. I think it's the greatest investment Lakeland that they ever made in this area. When I graduated, they made me make a few comments at the awards ceremony. And they asked if I had any suggestions. I said, yes, make it a 4-year place. Because it does so much for people around here. And incidentally, for those of you that are from Menor, I don't want to embarrass him, but the superintendent of schools for the Menor school system is here today with his lovely wife. And if you want to see a good school system, I urge you to go visit over there. I think you'll find that they do a marvelous job. And the kids, I was there when they had a levy program to talk about the levy. And several of the students got up and talked. I was embarrassed. I couldn't have done as well myself. They were great. These are the students. I work on an outing every year. I'm working on it right now for basketball boys. I've been doing it for about 17, 18 years. I put on a golf outing every year, raise money for the kids for the basketball program. The kids are so appreciative and they're so good. And our boys have never embarrassed you at a game. You go to some schools, you go to games, sometimes kids from other schools are must embarrass their coach, not in Menor. It's a marvelous system. So, anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I think it's wonderful that you are here and talking about this. My father served in World War II, as did 4 of his brothers, and God sent all of them back home, which was amazing at that time. We never talked to my father. He never really talked about it, and I know that you're able, obviously, to do that now. when your kids were growing up, did they have any interest, or were you able to talk to them about it, or was it, too difficult at that time?
At first, when they started asking, and then I said to myself, wait a minute. They want to know. I have an obligation. Well, then they said, the kids at our class want you to come and visit. Would you come? Sure, I'll come. The young people want to know. Yet I'll be sitting around a VFW meeting or hall. The guys, the kids don't care. I said, well, you want to go? I wouldn't go talk to them. Now, how can you criticize if you're not willing to help?
We never thought to ask him about it. It just,
No, they started asking questions, so I did it. At first, maybe I wondered, do I really want to tell them about it? I said, no. They want to know, they should know. I heard that comment frequently about some guy I don't want to talk about, yet sometimes the person that makes it is critical of the young people. How can you criticize a group and not be willing to share? I find it very difficult to do that. It's, I do a lot of charity work, have all my life, heavily involved in charity. And I don't know, if people need help, then you should be willing to help. Yet I hear some better, I don't want to talk about. I attribute that to one of two things. One, maybe they figured they didn't do as much as they should, or maybe they just aren't proud of what they did. I don't know. But if you're proud of what you did, why wouldn't you want to talk about it? The most decorated guy, and I think in history, but at least in World War II, but I think he's in history, was Audie Murphy. He even wrote a book about his. He wrote a movie, had a movie about it. He was willing to talk about it. Probably and he was, without a doubt, he had 30-some medals. I mean, the guy was unbelievable. You're talking, why shouldn't you? I never could understand that. Now, not to go out and brag about it, but people ask you to speak about it. Why wouldn't you do it? I don't know. Never could figure that out. I have an obligation to do it. Yes, sir.
You mentioned, I think, did you say that you were at 2 of the concentration camps?
Yeah, they were in the same city, same area. One was for men, one was for boys or women and children. It's the only time, I don't believe any other place they were segregated. But at that particular one, Treblinka, they were separated. I don't know why. I have no idea. Only the Germans would know.
Can you talk more about what you did in those concentration camps? Did you help in the relief efforts or bringing food?
No, they had medical people do that.
Did you collect?
You see, they want you to do anything because of you have to feed them at a certain pace and a certain stuff because they're so down. You give them, like the food we would have, in the rations or something, would actually harm them. So they said, for God's sake, don't, they're going to ask you, they're going to beg you. Please don't. Or we give them a chocolate bar. Oh my God, the worst thing in the world, you give them was a chocolate bar. But the thing is that, so all our job was to get the area secured, and the medical people took care of that. They had other people they brought in right away. Oh yeah, they were ready for that.
Did you collect evidence that were used in war crime trials?
Well, I don't know. I have nothing to do with that. All I know is the General Patton came out with an order. Everybody had to go through it. That was there. If you were a non-combatant, you were in the headquarters company, you still had to go through it. Go see it. I wanted you to see it so you would never forget it. It was his orders. You had to go see it. So even if you weren't going in, you had to go walk through it and see it. Oh yeah, it was brutal. Guys broke down. I saw guys been in combat as long as I had. Couldn't handle it. Hard to believe. But it happened. I'm sure it was the same in the Pacific with the Japanese, but I don't know. I wasn't there, so I can't comment on that.
So where were you in August of 1945?
I got home on July 17th or 18th. I was to be home for 33 days. And I think there was 2 days to go, and I was to report to Fort Leonard Wood to go to the Pacific, get ready to go to the Pacific. And they dropped the second atomic bomb. So I knew I was not going to the Pacific. So I knew when I went back, I'd be discharged. Well, I had a lot of points because they had a point system in those days. So I went back down to Fort Leonard Wood, and the captain said, you've got enough points to get out today if you want to, but how about sticking around a couple weeks, help me with getting these guys discharged, because they were coming back off of leave. So I stuck around a couple weeks, but then I got discharged. I still was only 20 years old. But I helped to get discharged. They had a point system. You got 1 point for every month you served, an extra point for every month overseas, 5 points for every medal. I forget what else it was. And I think it was like 75 points was qualified, and I was way over. So I could get out. So I stuck around for a couple weeks because I had nothing to do. So what's the difference? Not going overseas. I didn't care. A couple weeks now didn't make no difference. Plus, Fort Leonard was only an hour or so from St. Louis, and it was in fall, and I could go to the baseball games every weekend. Nobody cared, so go and see the Cardinals play. Probably it was fine with me. But I got out then a couple weeks later. Yeah. But it's no, it's a horrible thing, but war is never good. I think too often. Generally those that so gung-ho to go to war didn't go themselves. I don't find many combat veterans are out saying, let's go to war. I find others, but not combat veterans. We got a candidate right now that can't wait to tell the world, if necessary, we're going to drop atomic bombs on you. But when his turn came, he got a deferment. So I'm not so quick to say we're going to drop bombs on anybody. I think that should be the last resort. That's only when you have to do something bad, but too often I think we've jumped too quick. That's only one man's opinion.
Did you, I've heard vets having like nightmares after, reoccurring nightmares about what they had seen. Have you had any of those issues?
I might have one night a year or something when I have trouble getting to sleep. But that's rare. At first it was more often, but then gradually you get away from it. Maybe the first 6 months you have a few times because it was fresh. But now, I think Elvira and I have been married 3 years now. Maybe it's happened 3-4 times in 3 years, that's all. You're bound to get some. I mean, you cannot go through all of that. You don't, it's like anything else happens in your life, you don't forget it. You can't forget war, it's impossible to forget it, but you can't dwell on it either. But you have a bad once in a while, you get, but no. Most of the time I found that if you talk about it, or if there's a movie, I don't miss a movie because of it. If The Longest Day came out and I wanted to go see it, I did. I didn't let that, like I told you about Saving Private Ryan. Because you can't go on you can't hide yourself in society. I found most of the time, most things, they never bothered me.
That movie, Saving Private Ryan, you said it was worse than what was in the movie.
The war is actually worse than that, oh yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, it was, Saving Private Ryan, incidentally, was, a lot of people think it was made on a family in the Midwest, and it wasn't.
It was or wasn't?
And it was not. It was based on the family from Tonawanda, New York, the Nyland family.
Oh.
My late life went to school with those kids. And the one they saved later committed suicide. Oh, yes. Yeah, if you don't think the country's over there appreciate it, go back and visit the cemeteries. The people are very nice about it. I can't complain. Any questions for you young folks there? Well, I want to thank you very much for your attention. It's never if I hedged around sometimes, it's only because some of the subjects aren't too, you wouldn't, I don't want to get into too much detail because, especially with young people, it's not pleasant to shoot people. Any way you slice it, even though they're shooting at you, it's never a pleasant thing. And I've seen people who were trained for this. We are highly trained when you went into combat. I've seen them the first time they got in battle, couldn't pull the trigger. Some of them lost their life because of it. Some of them got lucky, somebody else shot them, but the first couldn't do it. It's not as easy as people think it is. So it's not a pleasant thing, that's all. It's true.